Take a look at these floating puzzle pieces: a manger, a mountain, a cross. Every congregation faces a quiet crisis among its most faithful attendees: biblical illiteracy. People know the individual stories, but they lack the whole picture. They cannot connect the Sermon on the Mount to a conversation with Nicodemus because they simply do not know the actual sequence of events. This fragmentation gets worse when we look at how churches operate. We place junior high students, adults, and the Sunday sermon into their own separate boxes, each studying completely different topics. By isolating everyone, we strip families of a shared vocabulary, making it difficult to talk about faith around the dinner table. Riverchase is addressing this through a deliberate 15-month commitment. As this timeline shows, over 65 consecutive Sundays, the entire congregation will study every recorded conversation Jesus had, in the exact chronological order he had them. This initiative syncs the entire church calendar. Instead of separate tracks, all those isolated age groups and the main Sunday sermon now focus on the same single node at the same time. To support this, the material is loaded with highly specific tools. The lessons include first-person narrative accounts, historical context from the Restoration movement, and studies of the original Greek. But here is the reality. A meticulously designed curriculum sitting by itself on a shelf does absolutely nothing. Words on a page cannot engage a busy, distracted, and skeptical modern audience. To take an ancient text and make it feel like it was written for the exact person sitting in the room requires a human catalyst. Picture a Sunday morning class. A skeptical 13-year-old is listening to the story of the paralyzed man lying by the pool. Suddenly, the teenager leans forward, uncrosses their arms, and says, "Maybe some people get used to not getting better." That specific moment of insight does not happen by accident. It is the result of intentional, reverse-engineered architecture built by a teacher long before Sunday morning. It starts with relational architecture. A teacher learns the names and histories of the people in their room. They become attentive enough to notice when a 2,000-year-old story about paralysis lands heavily on an adult who feels completely stuck in their own life. Then there is the intellectual architecture. By spending just a few minutes unpacking the original language beforehand, the teacher demonstrates to the class that the text holds layers of meaning that reward deep investigation. When Jesus talks about life, he doesn't use the ordinary word. He uses zoe. Explaining this means life in all its fullness, life that death cannot touch, shifts the weight and promise of the passage. Finally, the teacher uses curated silence. Out of 15 possible discussion prompts, they select only 2. They ask a well-crafted question and let the room sit in uncomfortable silence. They give the class permission and space to actually think. The solitary hours spent on a Tuesday morning, reading, praying, and wrestling with the text, are the exact mechanism that turns a lesson plan into a targeted, personal intervention for a student holding on to a question they've carried for years. This intentional preparation bleeds out of the classroom. Later that afternoon at Sunday lunch, a father mentions the story of the paralyzed man. The 13-year-old looks up from a phone and says, "That's what we talked about too." An organic conversation begins. Adolescence is a vulnerable time for faith. When a student sees their father and their Sunday school teacher wrestling with the same text, it sends a clear message. The adults around them actually believe the words they are studying. That shared experience multiplies when the entire church gathers in the main auditorium. The preacher stands up and delivers a sermon drawn from the exact same verses every class studied that morning. As this diagram shows, the classroom discussion acts like a small ripple. The sermon amplifies it. An idea that a student nearly understood in class suddenly clicks from the pulpit, synchronizing with a massive wave that captures the attention of the entire room. For visitors walking through the doors, the benefit is immediate. They step into a building where people share a living vocabulary and are actively engaged in a single study from the hallways to the pews. Sustained, unified study pulls faith out of a compartmentalized hour and turns it into a whole church conversation. It builds a congregation that trusts each other enough to talk about what they believe. Over 15 months, this journey will track from a 12-year-old Jesus in a temple courtyard to the risen Lord standing on the shore of the sea at dawn. But years from now, students will not remember the workbook. They will remember the teacher who showed up, the person who knew their name, who had the marks of wrestling with the text still on them, and who took their questions seriously. Look at this network tree. Teaching is not a solo act. Investing the time into one person equips them to carry that influence into their own marriages, their parenting, and eventually their own teaching. The ripples do not stop when class ends. The curriculum provides the text and the structure, but the teacher creates the physical and emotional space where a life-altering conversation with Jesus actually has room to occur. A teacher's willingness to prepare for those 65 Sundays is what creates the opportunity for someone to finally find a place to land the questions they've been carrying for years.